Hello, everyone. So welcome to this joint webinar by Celonis and Deloitte. It's about time we get started now, but yeah, I think there's still some people coming in. But due to the fact that we have a lot of stuff to cover, I would suggest we get started straight away. So today's session is going to be on process mining for purchase to pay, and there especially in the context of our journey towards frictionless finance. This will be the content of today's session. We have a lot of different things to cover, so we will introduce ourselves first, then we'll have a short introduction to Celonis and also to the Deloitte Center of Process Bionics, after which we'll dive right into the challenge that we basically cover in this case study. And then we will introduce the solution to you guys that we came up with as implemented in the Celonis Business Cloud. In the end, we'll have a front-end demo and then some lessons learned, after which you guys can also ask some questions. We'll have the Q&A in the end. You guys will be muted throughout the session, but then in the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Okay, so just a few words on today's speakers. My name is Leo. I'm a manager at Deloitte. I've been working in the field of procurement optimization for around 5 years now. I've done a lot of offline optimization, but yeah, for quite some time now, I've been using Celonis as well as part of my basically process improvement initiatives. And I've been very happy with this tool so far, which is why me and Fabian initiated this session today. Okay, Fabian.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leo. My name is Fabian. I'm with Celonis now for a little over 2 years. I work as product marketing manager and here at Celonis serving as our subject matter expert for frictionless finance. We work with many clients all over the world on their finance processes, whether it's purchase to pay, accounts payable, accounts receivables. They're looking at the order to cash side. And very happy to be here today with Leo for this webinar with our partners of Deloitte to talk a little bit about how we can help clients together that are trying to improve their business processes and in particular finance or the procurement organization.
All right. Okay. So let's have a little general introduction. I think Celonis, you go first, basically.
Perfect. Yeah, Celonis, for everyone who's not familiar with what we're doing, Celonis, we started off as the first commercial process mining vendor many years ago. Right now we have a solution called the Intelligent Business Cloud. Kind of really brings that unprecedented experience of process mining to the cloud to companies all over the globe. You can see here on the left a selection of our customers, and if you look at it closely, you see there's many smaller companies, there's lots of large companies. All of them are spread all over the place and also spread all over industries. This webinar is focusing on the procurement organization, frictionless finance. The use cases are really diverse. We have people looking at improving their customer service processes. We have people trying to streamline their order processes, people improving working capital. So there's really all kinds of things you can do with the underlying technology. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the rest of the webinar. It's really great to see the market adoption for process mining picking up so quickly. You can see here on the bottom right, over the last 4 years only, we've seen 4,000% growth. And also when you're looking at the customers, you can see that process mining is something that really many companies around the world think about and care about. It brings them tremendous value. So it's always great to have a partner like Deloitte help servicing those customers, making sure they can succeed. And with that, back to you, Leo, to talk a little bit more about the Center for Process Bionics.
Thank you. So basically, what we have built at Deloitte, we call it the Center of Process Bionics, is I think something that's quite unique out there in the market. So over the past few years, we've basically grown to over 150 trained process mining experts all around the globe, which we enabled and we still enable based out of Germany, Düsseldorf. And we've been working quite closely with Celonis throughout this entire time, basically trying to enable more and more practitioners from the fields to employ the technology to more and more use cases, as we believe that there's tremendous value also in looking outside of the standard P2P and OTC processes. So that's something that we take pride in. And it's something that's grown tremendously over the past couple of years. So nowadays, basically, we are busy mostly supporting our clients in finding new use cases and also in getting better at process mining every day, basically. So that's a short introduction to the Center of Process Bionics. I think without further ado, we should get into the case study of today. So the challenge, as we framed this, is basically on the journey towards frictionless finance. And there's a few numbers I want to show you kind of as context for this topic. And these numbers are taken from the Deloitte Global CPO survey. So basically, every year we ask procurement professionals about their take on the market and their pain points. And this is taken from that. So if you're interested in this, go and check out also the Deloitte Global CPO survey. What we asked them, one of the questions is, so what do procurement professionals use analytics for nowadays? And that's the first question here. And the answers are very interesting because a lot of them answer, obviously, intelligence and advanced analytics for cost optimization, but then right behind that is process efficiency improvement. And then also in the list is procurement operations improvement, market intelligence, and also supplier portfolio optimization. So you can really see that data analytics is a tool that is widely used by procurement professionals in their day-to-day basically strategy. But then if you look at the lower part of this slide, we also asked the same people what are the main barriers to effective application of digital technology in procurement. And I think that gives quite a striking picture because a lot of these professionals say that a lack of data integration and also quality of data are the biggest issues basically that keep them from effectively using digital technology to improve their business. So the reason I'm showing this is because what we believe is that process mining is a technology that kind of pays in on both of these sides, interestingly, because on the one hand, it is a tool that you can use for intelligent analytics, but then it also solves some of these underlying issues down there. So for example, it gives you a good base for data integration, and it can also improve the quality of the data you're dealing with by basically showing you where there might be gaps or where you need to do improvements before you can use analytics. So that's just something, a little bit of, something to think about here. It's very interesting for us, and basically the market shows that process mining is one way to tackle these problems. Okay, so the case study at hand, maybe just a few words in general on this. This is actual real data, so this is not something that we made up. It's a real case that we have done at a real client, and we kind of scrambled the data a little bit in order to make it unrecognizable. But in general, this is something that doesn't come out of just out of our brains. So the client we've been working with is a large European food producer. They have a large purchasing volume of over 250 million euros per year. And they have a lot of different basically purchasing sites scattered across Europe, where they purchase different goods, and then they basically make that into food and resell it to wholesale. That's their business. And as you can imagine, such a business, especially when it's organically grown, can become quite complex. So in the case of this client, they had multiple purchasing organizations that were spread across multiple systems. and also some customized pieces of software, some workflows on the side. So really, from a system landscape perspective, something very challenging to look into and also to govern. Then when we were asked to step in, basically, there were a few obvious key pain points that we wanted to tackle. So the first and biggest one being very poor end-to-end process visibility. So if you have such a setup, it makes it very difficult to do end-to-end analysis. And it's something that was their biggest ask, basically, to have a single data model. And then obviously resulting from that, some other pain points, such as frequent holdups in the process, where process was getting stuck at some point, for example, delayed deliveries, and also some delays due to incorrect vendor information. And of course, all that basically then results also in a bad invoice to payment cycle time. So invoices not being paid on time, and also obviously large cost per purchase order, which is essentially a measure of efficiency. So that was kind of the basic setup of our client. In order to, basically explain this to you a little bit more, the system landscape here is something that I think a lot of you might have seen in their job or everyday life already. They have one master data system at this client that has the vendor master data, but also the material master data in it. And then there's 2 or 3 different systems below that. So one is basically the purchasing system where the POs and PRs are created. And then there's another downstream system that basically takes care of the SAP FI, so the accounting. On the side of that, there is another basically invoice scanning workflow. And what we will also show you as part of this case study is the action engine of Celonis that we introduced here. So that's just a little bit of background information. Keep that in mind when we show you the analysis later here. Our biggest task here was to create a single holistic data model that I will show you here in just a little bit. But before we get into the demo, I think Fabian has some introductory words on the Celonis Intelligent Business Cloud.
Exactly. Thank you, Leo. I think we can move over to the next slide already. What we want to highlight here is really quick, what is the Intelligent Business Cloud? Before we jump into the demo, just to make sure everyone who is not familiar with Celonis or the Intelligent Business Cloud yet, you know what we're talking about. Basically, the underlying technology is process mining technology. How it works is that Celonis is capable through a powerful event collection capability to connect to all kind of source systems, whether that's SAP or Microsoft, Salesforce, ServiceNow, really any kind of IT system that you might be running on your organization. It doesn't matter whether it's an on-prem solution or a cloud solution. We're also working with a lot of legacy systems that are homegrown. And all this information is collected into the Celonis Intelligent Business Cloud, where all the extraction, transformation, loading, and so on is taking place. So nothing to worry about. This whole extraction is extremely fast because we're using standard connectors that are already built for exactly those systems. And then we're basically following 3 steps of discovering, enhancing, and monitoring. So the first step, discovering, is where you really want to get this objective visual representation of your end-to-end process. When we're looking at a purchasing process, it's from the moment you create a purchase requisition until you pay the invoices and clear the invoices. When you're looking at an order process, it's from when the order is coming in until you receive the money and the bills are paid. So it's really always across those end-to-end processes. And as you will see in the demo in a second, also all the steps in between. And what you're now trying to do in this discover step is find inefficiencies, find bottlenecks, find friction in this process that is slowing you down, ultimately costing you a lot of money. And if something is slowing you down and costs you a lot of money, it's not hard to imagine that this, in most cases, also leads to a terrible customer experience. So the second step, enhancing, is where our so-called action engine comes in, among others. What's happening here, you not only see the inefficiencies, the bottlenecks, and you're not only able to prioritize what should you work on, but you're also able to kind of have the action engine running in the background at all times, and it will automatically detect those variations from the ideal process and proactively approach the user, or maybe even trigger an action in the source system directly with the next best action recommendation. So the action engine scans the whole process, finds an inefficiency, and once there's an inefficiency found, compares that, tries machine learning to find out what is the next best action to take, and then recommends that action. And then obviously you're not done yet. You also want to monitor your the impact of your initiative. And this is a very important step for you to show and to prove that your initiative really had the desired effect on your whole organization and the business outcomes that you expected. But it also allows you to take further action should you find out that there's a new issue that has to be taken care of. You can kind of go through those 3 steps again, and thereby make sure you're always working with the optimal business outcomes. Here in the top, I'm not going into detail here, just a couple of examples on what you can work on. If you want to improve working capital, on-time delivery is something you care about, cash discounts, system migration, order automation, customer onboarding. Those are all just a very small selection of the use cases we've seen in the past. And yeah, excited to see a little bit more about what Deloitte has been working on. So Leo, show us the live demo.
Yes, okay, cool, thank you, Fabian. So much for the presentation part for the moment. I will just switch very quickly here to our Celonis instance. I hope you guys can see this. Fabian, are you able to see it already? Or?
Yes, we can see it, Leo.
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is just a little summary of what we came up with here. It's essentially this project we've been working on was a project that went on for 1.5 years, and it's still ongoing. So obviously this is not all the things we did, but this is just kind of a little bit of a best of different analysis to kind of show you, give you a feeling of what you can do with Celonis in such a context. And what we have in stock for you today is, so the first thing I will do is I will introduce you to the Process Explorer. For those of you who have never seen Celonis and who've never been in touch, I think that's a good starting point. And then we'll get into 4 distinct analysis here. The first one being more on the purchasing side, so the PO creation side, and there we will look at process friction. The second analysis is more downstream. It's going to be towards payment performance, which is also very interesting for some of you probably. And the third one will then show you how we implemented the action engine to automate some approval steps in this payment process. And the fourth one we have here is a little bit more exotic. It's about the segregation of duties. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with it, but some of the ones that have been in touch with audit, for example, will know what I'm talking about here. For all the others, I will explain it shortly. But let's get started here with the Process Explorer. So this is basically the heart of the Celonis software. For us, this is always amazing to show to clients, because this is really usually the first time when they see their process in such clarity. It is due to basically add or reduce complexity. What you have here in the middle is called the process graph, basically. And as I move these levers here on the right, I can add or reduce the complexity of this picture. So essentially, I can add more and more events based on the frequency that they happen in. And as you can imagine, if I add all the activities here, and then also add all possible connections between the activities, it very, very quickly becomes unrecognizable. So it even takes quite a while to so look at that. That's what we call the spaghetti graph, basically, which is the reality that a lot of firms face when it comes to their purchasing process. But that's just to show you the complexity of this graph in a way. Let's just stick with a little easier version here for the moment. So for those of you who are not familiar with the purchasing process, I will just go through it very quickly to show you what is in here, basically. As you can see, we have the upstream events in here. So the purchase requisition, that's the starting point of the process. And then from that, the creation of a purchase order. And then we also have the entire AP part linked in this process graph. So the creation of the vendor invoice, the booking of the invoice, the scanning workflow is in here as well, and so on and so forth. So really, this is a full end-to-end graph of the P2P process. It also has various change events in here. So for example, when somebody changes the payment method or any other information on a purchase order, that's all captured in here. And as you can see, all the different events are linked by times in here, but you can also add a lot of other variables such as automation rate or the amount that flows through a certain activity. So I think for the content of this webinar, I think this should be enough as an introduction. Let me show you how we implemented our end-to-end visibility using this technology. So this thing that resonated really well with the client and that we also are very happy about. What I said before is that there's basically 4 different systems to be visualized here. There is the SAP MM and then the accounting. There's also scanning workflow and then also the action engine, which we will get to later. And the way we did it, basically, we added color coding to this. So if I add more of the variants here, you can see that the events have different colors. So the ones that are kind of this dark purple color here, these are all the ones that are in the PO system, and the ones that are lighter, basically those are in FI. And the scanning ones are this teal color. Action engine is also there. So what you can imagine is that for procurement professionals who have to work with multiple systems, this is something that is actually beautiful because they are not able to see this in any other way. If you want to see, for example, how long something takes to get from the PO system to the final payment, you will have to consult multiple different systems, look into Excel, possibly do that offline in some kind of way. So here, basically, this enables you to have a straight-on view on all of these different data sources, which are nicely integrated into one live data model. So I think that's something that really we spend a lot of time on with the client, because this is really what drives the value in the end. Once you have this, you can do a lot of different things on top of it, but building this kind of groundwork is something that really is appreciated by a lot of clients, just simply having this overview. Okay, so with that being said, let's jump into some of the analysis that you can do. And of course, we kind of make these a little bit more easy so that we're able to present them in the context of this webinar. But what you see here is a little bit of a mixture of a traditional vendor performance monitoring linked with some aspects of basically process impact. So this middle graph here shows you all the different vendors, and it also shows you the process cycle time for these vendors. The size of the dot here then basically means how much business you've done with them, how big your PO volume was, essentially. So what that enables me to do is I can very easily kind of drill down into some of these vendors, for example, by clicking on a certain material here to analyze the vendor base for such a certain material. So for example, material number 22, I can see that there's quite a lot of vendors for this already. Yeah? So there's 62 vendors for this material, which by itself would be a finding for a lot of firms, by the way. In this case, it's something that we actually did with the client. We basically implemented a vetting process for all of these vendors, because there was such a large vendor base that we had to come up with some KPIs in order to reduce this base. And if you look down here, the cool thing is basically that you can have side by side some of these more traditional KPIs, such as delivery time improvement over time, delivery time distribution, but then you can also look into things that are more process related. So the one we picked out here is the change rate. In this case, what we're looking at is the change rate of purchase orders after they've been sent, essentially. So it's any changes to POs that shouldn't happen after the fact, basically. And for us, that's a measure that's proven to basically show to show how well you're set up in your purchasing process. Because if you have a lot of these changes, that means that some kind of information is incorrect, or you're not aligned with your vendors, basically, in some kind of way. So that's something that we look into quite a bit, and that can have a lot of different reasons. So If I drill down into this a bit further, for example, if I choose this first vendor here, you can see that all of the dashboard components shift with it. And if you look at the change rate here on the right, you can see that there's a big peak here, sometime in the middle of March, and you can see all of a sudden the change rate basically is 10%. So that means every 10 purchase order has to be changed in some kind of way, and that's just something for us. It's a classic finding basically that shows that there has been some kind of change in the vendor catalog. Yeah, that's one of the root causes of this, for example. So the vendor changes their product catalog. You send out purchase orders that are based on an old catalog, and then essentially you will have to redo them after a while. So that's something, if you align that, you are well on your way towards frictionless finance, because having these kind of things in line with your vendors, that's basically the starting point for having a frictionless bottom process then. So I think we're already going a little bit over time, so I will switch to the next dashboard here. That's just to give you an idea of what you can do and which KPIs you kind of can look into on top of the ones that you've seen in other BI tools as well. So the next one we have here is a payment performance dashboard. On the one hand, it shows you the invoice volumes over the different months. Then it also shows you basically your payment accuracy. So that's the difference between the payment due date and the actual payment date. And like I said, this is actual data from the client. So as you can see, they are not doing too bad, right? So this bucket here, 2 days early until due date is quite large. If you look at the pie chart down here, you can see that they're paying about 65% of their invoices on time, which is, I guess it's a starting point, but there's obviously a lot of room for improvement. So the way we go about this is basically by selecting these kind of cases. I can do this here basically, and then just apply this selection here. That enables me to only look at these cases here in the process graph. So I can have the KPIs and the process graph side by side and kind of look into what's happening here in the back end. So what you can see is that there is this event, vendor creates invoice, which is basically the date that the vendor creates the invoice. And then you can see that the event that happens most often after this directly is due date passed. So that was a finding we actually had with this client. Basically what that means is before the invoice even gets entered into the system, the due date is already passed. So that's something that's very strange, right? So things like that, they will strike you, and you will try to dig a little bit further and look into what could be the reason for this. And essentially, several different workshops with this client where we saw and tried to figure out what their payment process is like. And what we found basically was that for certain invoices where the three-way match failed, for example, or that simply didn't have a PO to match against, so I don't know, electricity bills or other non-PO invoices, essentially we had the case that they were just sent by the accounting department to different approvers through email. And these approvers had to say, okay, this invoice is okay to book through email as well, which you can imagine is a nightmare when it comes to the process, because you can absolutely not govern it. There's absolutely no visibility. There's no backlog, nothing. So that was what we found at the client, and it's something that honestly I've seen quite a bit with many different clients, many different industries in the past years. So I'm sure some of you can relate to this kind of finding. But that's just basically to explain you how we generate value from these kind of analysis, how we dig further into root causes. Getting into how we resolve this issue, basically, if you look at this, Action Engine tab here, you see that there's basically two different sides. So what we're showing here is the way the process went before the Action Engine implementation. And then on the other side here, we're showing the process with the Action Engine. And obviously, there's not a lot to see here on the left side, because these things happen offline, right? So it's very difficult to make process events for this, because there's simply no data points that you can grasp, which then results in essentially a long invoice receipt to invoice booking time, and then also about 60% payment on time. So what we did using Celonis and the Action Engine, essentially we basically put this whole process online in a way by introducing several new events here. So after the invoices like this basically come and are received, the Action Engine picks them up, routes them to the appropriate approver in a nicely made email that has a button in it that says, are you okay with this invoice you want to approve? Then the person can click the button. So that's the first step here. The second step then also basically shows whether they read the email, so whether it's in progress or not, the approval. And then lastly, basically the invoices are approved and booked through. So what are the results of this implementation of the Action Engine? As you can see, yeah, basically there's a lot less cases here because we only introduced this very late in the project. But it basically dramatically reduced the invoice receipt to invoice booking time. And also, obviously, the payment on time rises dramatically through this as well. And for those of you who are based out of Europe, I'm not sure if this is so much a thing in the States, but cash discounts are a big thing here. So if you pay on time or if you pay a little bit early, you can get a cash discount. And we were also able to pump up those numbers here using the Action Engine. So I think that's just one of the storylines that we basically uncovered through through our time at this client. I will make a little bit of a break here now thematically. So the last thing that we will show you during this presentation is something that I've mentioned earlier, is segregation of duties. So a lot of procurement professionals have to deal with auditors, right? So because procurement is a risky process. If you don't watch out, people can wire themselves money. They can do a lot of things that are not wanted in the governance kind of way of looking at things. So one thing that a lot of firms struggle with essentially is having the information of who is able to do what in which system all in one place. Essentially, if you have one SAP system, that's a nice thing. You can use SAP GRC, it's fine. But if you have your process spread out over several different systems, that will result in a nightmare when it comes to governance. But obviously, what we were looking at earlier, if you have a process twin in the way that we created it for this client, that makes a beautiful case for segregation of duties, because essentially you can use this overarching data source to look into what all your users can do in the different systems. So, for example, if you consider this first box here, it basically checks the cases where the vendor master data of a certain purchase order was created by the same person who created the purchase order, which can be an indicator for a fraud, for example, because you could potentially wire yourself money. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And then what this basically does is it beautifully shows you here all these cases combined, and can even put a number on it. So how much value is at risk here if this was a fraudulent transaction? And you can do that with a lot of other things here as well. As you can see, this is quite clear now, but when we first started doing this with the client, we had hundreds and hundreds of cases due to the fact that they didn't effectively enforce this. So this is basically just to show you that you can also do a little bit more exotic things with process mining. You don't have to stick to pure process analysis. You can basically implement whatever you want on top of a digital process twin in the way that we implemented it here. So I think that brings me to the end of this practical demonstration. You guys are free to ask questions here very soon, but I will, before we close, I will basically show you two more things on our approach to implementing these kind of projects, and then also on the outcomes of this specific project. So I think this is a very important slide, because it shows how we deliver value for our clients using process mining. So when clients first start doing process mining, they basically expect returns directly. Yeah? So they want to install the software, and then they're like, oh, where are my findings? Yeah? But what we've found over the last couple of years is that what really drives the difference, and what really is the key to success when you do process mining, is having a mindset of constant change in a way. So what we do when we deliver these projects is we usually will do a short proof of concept. It's basically just a few weeks. It captures the major process events, and then we try to generate some early wins to get people excited about process mining and to show them that there's value in this. But then, if you really want to kind of embrace this, this sense of constant change, what you need to do is you need to essentially never assume that things are set in stone, right? When it comes to processes, these are living things. It's not possible to just set it up once and then let it grow, because at some point it will just basically have a life of its own. And so we basically like using Celonis in a true prong kind of way. So on the one hand, we do root cause analysis, which is what I just showed you also, which can result in coming up with new KPIs, right? So maybe things you missed before, or maybe you were measuring the wrong things. Things like that we do in a root cause analysis. But then once we found these things, we can also use Celonis for continuous monitoring. So on the one hand, define KPIs, and on the other hand, monitor them. No matter what you do, these initiatives should never be by themselves, right? So there needs to be concrete change. There needs to be some kind of activity that comes out of it. Otherwise, it basically just runs into nowhere. So that's just a little bit on how we implement these things. If you're interested in this, I can elaborate on it during the questions some more. So last slide from me here. Basically, the overall business impact that we generated. I like to think of this as a kind of three pillars in a way. So there was a direct impact on the procurement, so on the procurement itself, basically. So what we did is we reduced the supplier base of this client, which makes a huge difference actually, because the more master data you have to maintain, the more articles you have to maintain, materials, it will basically drown you in all this work that you need to do. So one of the most effective things that we were able to do is basically reduce the supplier base, which then obviously also ramps up your purchasing numbers with the other remaining suppliers, which in return can increase your savings. So that's what happened here. We had a large increase in savings due to increased purchasing volumes, but then also the cash discounts where we were able to pump up through introducing the Celonis Action Engine. So that was basically the impact on the direct and indirect procurement. The impact on the process is quite interesting as well. By basically showing people the amount of unnecessary work that we're doing. So how many times are you opening a document? How many times do you need to change something after it's already been closed? By kind of having this mindset installed, people were able to decrease this by 34%, which is crazy, because if you think that each change of a purchase order and invoice takes a few minutes, if you multiply that with such a large purchasing volume, that's hours and days and weeks of time that just get wasted. And the client here was able to decrease all of this waste basically by 34%, which is an incredible number over 1.5 years. The other thing is basically what I already talked about, invoice to payment time. We were able to reduce that to a more realistic 30 days. So that is aligned also with most standard payment terms, as you can imagine, and that makes a lot more sense than the 38 days we had before. But then one last point on this basically is the intangible impact, and I think I cannot stress this enough. Really, what happened at the client was that they had a little bit of a mind shift from oh man, we're making mistakes towards we can do this. It's just something that we need to optimize, and they basically ingrained that in their company culture. And it was really nice to see how, like in the beginning, they were afraid of having these Celonis analysis because they were so, let's say, harsh, right? You see the harsh reality that you never really wanted to see, especially in the beginning. But then once you get over that point, once clients start adapting this kind of mindset that it's not bad to actually look at the real process flow, that's when you can really start making a change in a cultural perspective. And that's what we found at the client. And I think that's one of the biggest impacts that process mining can have on business in general. Okay, so I think this is actually where, yeah, okay, so time is quite well. So we have been talking for 40 minutes. I would suggest unless you have anything to add, Fabian, that we can enter the Q&A.
Absolutely, yes. One thing I would like to just highlight once more is the importance of not only looking at those insights, but also taking action, right? Many times you try to understand something, and once you found or think you found a solution, that's when your improvement starts breaking down, right? So can only highlight that once more. It's always important to generate the insights, but it's also of the greatest importance that you use something like the action engine that will make sure and Leo, you touched that point as well, right? Your whole organization is getting behind this transformation initiative, because ultimately it's this behavior change, and for everything you discover in your process, people need to do the work differently. The action engine is obviously one part that helps people do that. There are other ways as well, but that's really a very important point. And I think with that, we can move on to the Q&A for everyone. So we see a couple of questions already, and we'll get to them in a second. For everyone else who has not submitted a question yet, on your GoToWebinar panel, there should be kind of this little box where you can submit questions. So if you have any questions to the project that Leo just described, the Deloitte approach, also questions on the Celonis Intelligent Business Cloud and what we're doing from a technical perspective, feel free to submit those questions now. And with that, I think Leo will just go over them one by one.
Honestly, I'm struggling a little bit with the with this tool, but I'm trying my best to flip through these questions.
I think there's one question that we already got in here, which is, what is the best way to integrate data and processes when they are spread across fragmented systems and technologies? I think it's an excellent question, something, and you've also seen that in the demonstration that Leo just showed, right? It's not unusual that processes are going across different systems. It's more or less the normal scenario that we see over and over again. And what you're doing there is you really access all the different source systems. If we say at Celonis, we have standard connectors that make it incredibly easy to connect to all kind of systems simultaneously. And then you just integrate all this data into one data model, and all of that can be done in Celonis. And this allows you to very quickly look at this whole end-to-end process with data that's really going across many different systems. So when we're looking at procurement, for example, something could start in an SAP Ariba system, for example. Then you see the fulfillment in an ERP system before you move on to scanning the invoice in open text, and then use an ERP system for paying the invoice or something like that. So this is something that we're seeing over and over again, and something that's very easy to do. There's a question on, do you have any example in manufacturing or subcontracting processes? As we've said before, the technology is really process agnostic, so it can work with all kinds of sort of systems and all kinds of processes. When we're looking at a manufacturing process, something that's incredibly important is, for example, the throughput times. We try to get your production line on track to just be faster and more reliable. Something that's also we see continuous more and more is, for example, a make-to-order process where you get a customized order, and then you obviously want to be able to fulfill this order as quickly as possible to create a kind of a competitive advantage over other producers in the same category. So that's something that we also see increasingly, and in the same way as you would look at, as we've seen in the demo, the throughput times of the purchase order and across the different activities, you would look at the throughput of the order that you received through your systems and then also through your production line. So that's obviously one of the prime examples for manufacturing, but you can look at so many more things. Like if you want to optimize for waste management, if you want to optimize your warehousing, which also can improve working capital. If you want to do any of those things, process mining can really be a very powerful tool. Without the action flow as shown, is there a possibility that there will be a lot of false positives as the deviations are expected in any process? So where's the value because the client already know that they are deviations? Excellent question. And it's not all about knowing that there are deviations, right? But you want to understand where exactly are they and which deviations have an impact on your business and the desired business outcome. And you also want to prioritize them. In many cases, you know, and you never know the full 100% view. If you remember the spaghetti diagram that Leo showed you very early on, this is not something an organization would be very familiar with. If you get 10 people spread across your purchasing process in one room and ask them, hey, where are the deviations, where are inefficiencies, you probably get a list of 100 inefficiencies, but it's really hard to get the other 900. And also for those 100, it's incredibly hard and challenging to estimate what business impact do those really have. How much manual rework do they cause? Is it working capital that I'm losing? Is it throughput times that are getting longer? So this is really where the value lies, not only in knowing that there are deviations, but exactly knowing what they are and what impact they have. And Leo, please feel free to add also a little bit from your experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think a lot of times also what you should really be worried about is the things you have never had on your radar before, right? Because that's what we see with a lot of firms when they have processes that have been set up in a sloppy way. People will just say, okay, we've been always doing it like this, but the way they are doing it is either very laborious, for example, or very risky. People won't necessarily tell you that, right? So it's not something that is on everybody's plate. These are the things that when we talk to CPOs, they will usually be like, oh man, okay, I'm so glad I saw that.
Excellent. Then we have another question. I think that's an easy one. Can you apply your service and solution also in a scenario which includes SAP Ariba procurement to pay solution? Absolutely. So the answer is yes, we see that many, many times. And then probably a question for you, Leo. Did this Celonis implementation at this client generate savings and efficiencies which equated or exceeded costs of implementation consulting from Deloitte? So I would assume yes, absolutely, after having seen those impressive results that you just showed. But maybe you can also elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So that's actually an excellent question, because when I talk to clients about generating a business case for process mining, a lot of them are a little bit hesitant because they're like, okay, what are we going to get out of it? And the truth is, you don't really know before you start doing it, right? Because it's a little bit like opening Pandora's box. You're not going to know what's going to hit you until you get started. But then what I can say from my experience is that so far, every single client we've worked with who has gone beyond the proof of concept stage, let's say, has received a lot of business value from it. Because, like I said earlier, all of these processes, they're in a way living things, right? So it's not you cannot expect that if you do such an activity once, it will cure it forever, right? You need to have some kind of way to reacting to changing processes and to changing process demands. And the clients that we basically implemented this software in, all of them have had a business case at some point. Also, one thing that I didn't mention earlier is that when we do this kind of activity, it's not a one-way street. So we don't come in and we set up software and then we will leave and you need to basically cope yourself. It's a process of enablement, right? So we will do some initial POC, and then there will be a handover phase where we teach people how to use the software so that they can help themselves in improving their everyday processes. So it's basically a thing where we don't even want to be there the entire time, because we believe that people need to be aware of their process inefficiencies by themselves, and they just need to have the right tools basically to take care of it. That's our take on it.
Excellent. And I think we have time for one or two more questions. One of them is, what was the key message used to ensure the adoption of constant change in the customer? Maybe Leo, that's something that you can talk to a little bit. I'm assuming it's something around just seeing what's going on in the first place, but you're more familiar with the project than I am.
I think the point there is basically that the times we live in today, they've greatly changed. All of you know that, especially when it comes to purchasing. Sourcing is 100% global. It transforms at the blink of an eye, basically. If you want to stay on top of that game, you have to embrace some kind of error culture, right? If you basically penalize people for making mistakes in some kind of way, in such a setting where everything shifts constantly, it's a very dangerous thing, because they will try to reduce their exposure to these things. They will try to basically be less and less innovative. They will stick to the path that they seems safe to them in some kind of way. So I think if the key is basically that management convinces people, staff basically, that it is also okay to just try and fail, right? So that's it's a cheesy thing to say, but really, if you can tell apart the firms where they're just saying it, and the firms where they have actually embraced this as a part of their culture. And once you have that, I think then it makes it very easy to become more of a fluid kind of structure, right? So you can much more easily shift and much more easily adapt to shifting markets, for example. So it really depends on the business as well a little bit, but it really eventually it starts with you, and it starts with being okay with changing. Also, I think that's the most important point there. It's still a little bit abstract, I get, but yeah. So
perfect. I think with that we are kind of concluding the webinar as our time is up. I see there are a couple of questions still coming in. We'll make sure to properly follow up with them afterwards. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. If you have any other follow-ups, feel free to drop us an email or short note on LinkedIn. We'll be happy to talk to you again.
Perfect. Then thank you and goodbye. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.